By 1971, it had been 4 years and 2 failed albums since the man who became Alice Cooper left Phoenix to become a rock star. That February, Alice Cooper exploded onto the charts with Love It to Death.
When you have a hit record, the world gets real fast. There was no such thing as days off.
Nothing came easy, nothing came free.
9 months after the release of Love It to Death, the band unleashed Killer. Killer presented a darker vision of the Alice Cooper character, one that would haunt the man called Alice for years to come.
We made the character a little bit stronger, a little bit more dark. That was just a natural evolution, that this character is more of a villain.
Our goal was really to get parents to hate us. If we disgusted a parent, that was exactly where we wanted to go to.
Alice Cooper gave parents plenty of reasons to be disgusted. Beheadings, hangings, electrocutions, live snakes, and butchered baby dolls were all part of Alice's evil act.
Dead baby.
Back home in Phoenix, Alice's minister father was forced to defend his son's scandalous behavior to mortified parishioners.
He got in a lot of trouble with his church about it, but he stood by me. He says, look, I know my kid is not satanic. I know that what he does, a lot of it's a sense of humor.
And now that Alice Cooper had hit upon a formula for success, he wasn't about to repent or relent. In the summer of '72, Alice hit with School's Out. The raucous anthem of high school rebellion became the #2 album in the nation and rocketed the band to a higher level of fame and fortune.
We're sort of now a gigantic wave. Covers of everything, covers of Forbes. Everybody's talking about them, TV clips. It's 20-hour days and a lot of traveling and limos and rock and roll and babes and drinking.
$billion famous. La da 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 da.
7 months after the breakout of School's Out, the band topped itself and the album charts with an explosive self-parody entitled $1 Billion Babies.
It was just the fact that our formula was working. Everything was working. People liked the albums, people loved the show, and they couldn't get enough of it. It was the best time of my life at that point.
Alice's best time was also his highest time, because by now, his bud was his constant companion.
Yeah, I just live for right now. 2 beers, different brands.
He couldn't go to bed unless he made sure he had a beer sitting next to the bed, because that's the first thing that he did in the morning.
Before I'd open my eyes, I'd have 3 or 4 hits of beer, and then I'd wake up, turn on the cartoons, and then get up, throw up. I said, okay, I'm ready for the day. Let's go.
Just a little insane. A couple shots, I can't feel no pain.
And Alice was definitely becoming an alcoholic.
What are your immediate plans now, then? Going back to America?
Well, I'm gonna go home and get drunk.
Yeah.
For one. You don't mind if I drink?
Go right ahead.
Nobody really knew that every once in a while I'd get up in the morning and throw up blood. Throwing up blood was part of being on the road.
Look at me. Would you buy a car from this man?
By now, Alice's stage persona had become a malicious presence with a life of its own.
When I assume the character, I have no idea what he's going to do, because it's not me.
The creation was taking over its creator.
I had to be Alice all the time. If I was in a restaurant, I had to tip over a table. If I was going to a concert, I'd have to get thrown out. So I'd drink myself in it because it wasn't natural for me to do that.
The Alice character cast its dark shadow over the band. Drummer Neil Smith and guitarist Mike Bruce had grown tired of Alice's theatrics, upstaging their music.
Every night for the last 6 months of touring, they would take a position. We're wearing our dungarees tonight. We're not performing anything but the songs, and I would have to go in the dressing room every night and just keep talking and talking till I got up to go on that night and do the show.
No more, Mr. Night Sky. No more, Mr. Green Blue Baby. No more, Mr. Night Sky. They say he's sick, he's a sea blue baby.
The conflict came to a head during the making of their 1973 album Muscle of Love. Producer Bob Ezrin walked into the studio and hit a wall of resistance.
I turned to Mike Bruce and I said, you know, I think that the guitar riff here should be, you know, this here. And Mike looked at me and said, no, we worked this out. We like it like this. And I thought, something's going on here.
We wanted to reinvent Alice Cooper Group as something that could do an album. Perhaps it wasn't tethered to a major theatrical production.
I just wasn't ready for the conflict. I wasn't ready to fight. So I resigned.
Muscle of Love came out in the winter of '73, their 7th record in 4 years. And though it hit number 10 on the album charts, it was considered only a modest success. The band was exhausted, and they needed a break from the monster called Alice.
As his popularity grew and grew, that created a sort of a chasm between the band.
Members of the band really felt that they were being sort of subsumed by Alice's success and my power and Shep's power, and they needed to flex their muscles.
Maybe it was the right time for everybody to go do their own projects, but I wasn't going to give up the theatrics.
Mike Bruce and Neil Smith recorded solo albums. Neither album caused much excitement. They were, however, the final nails in the Alice Cooper Group's coffin.
We had climbed. We were just about ready to take over the universe. We were right at the edge of taking over the universe. How high it could have gone, I don't know.
Welcome to my nightmare. I think you're gonna like it. I think you're gonna feel it like you belong.
On April Fool's Day, 1975, 27-year-old Alice Cooper took the stage as a solo artist. He was nervous, and it wasn't just that he no longer had his friends backing him. He and manager Shep Gordon had funded the huge groundbreaking tour with their own money.
Welcome to my nightmare.
We basically took every penny of money that he had and I had and put it into Welcome to My Nightmare and rolled the dice on it. Just said, if we lose this, we lose everything. If we make it, it's going to be huge.
That's just the way we are when we come down.
Without the objections of his former bandmates weighing him down, Alice brought in a Broadway choreographer and elaborate costumes. Alice's theatrical vision soared. He and Shep had triumphed.
Welcome to my breakdown.
Alice also broke new ground as a songwriter with an uncharacteristically tender ballad, Only Women Bleed.
Man got his woman to take his seat. He got the power, oh, she got the need.
The song landed in the top 20, and while on tour, Alice met someone to sing it to, a beautiful young dancer named Cheryl Goddard.
Smoke some drinks and don't come home at all. Only women bleed.
Cheryl had joined Alice's tour as a dancer.
I said, Alice Cooper, who's she? So you ask me anything about Bach or Rachmaninoff, and I'll tell you what opus cantata and movement, but nothing about rock and roll.
I got to know her because I had to learn how to dance. Like on song like Some Folks was a Fred Astaire. Only skeletons dancing with the top hats and tails.
Though 18-year-old Cheryl was 9 years younger than Alice, they had much in common. Both their fathers were ordained ministers, and they shared the same quirky passion for cheesy monster movies.
We laughed so hard together. We would discuss the merits of a good grade B movie like Godzilla vs. Rodan.
When the tour was over, there was something really missing, and it wasn't the show. It was Cheryl.
Come on and save me now.
When the tour ended in July of '75, Alice and Cheryl started dating. Their romance was on a fast track to a future together.
We dated for about 9 months exclusively. and we're engaged for 3 weeks. That was it. Once he popped the question and we knew it was right, we did it.
There was never a doubt. I mean, it wasn't like, gee, I wonder if I should. Golly, I hope I don't have to give up all this. It was never a doubt. It was just like, well, I've got to marry her.
As the sun set over Mexico's Acapulco Bay on March 20th, 1976, Cheryl Goddard became Mrs. Alice Cooper.
Both of our fathers, who were pastors, ended up performing the ceremony, each giving us the vows to say to each other. Very special, very special.
Cheryl married Alice for better or worse. She knew he had a drinking problem, but she didn't know how bad his problem would become.
There didn't seem to be an obvious problem. If he were falling down or abusive or any of those things, I think attention would have been paid much more quickly.
I denied it for an awful long time, and she just kind of overlooked it because, you know, I mean, well, he'll come around, and he's still not missing any shows, and he's not mean, and he's not beating me. You know, I wasn't a cruel drunk. I wasn't a stupid drunk. I was just a drinker.
I find myself running in circles, lost and half insane.
By the time his Lace and Whiskey album came out in spring of '77, Alice Cooper's alcohol abuse had become a serious problem.
Got to the point where he wouldn't perform. He didn't want to leave his room.
Every time I would look at my stage clothes laying there, I would get literally nauseous.
We'd have to get physical with him, smack him around, but it was ugly. Especially because we loved him. You know, if you don't like a guy, it's easy to do whatever you got to do. But we all love him.
It was all alcohol. It was total alcohol derived. You know, I just toured too long.
After nearly a decade of nonstop drinking, Alice fell apart completely. He spent all of his time in his bedroom drinking and watching television.
Sometimes I drink more than I need.
The alcohol started acting like a depressant rather than an upper for me.
I think it was to the point where his health started to deteriorate. That we needed to address it, make some changes.
I was fearful for his life. I was. I went to his house and I found him in a state of acute pain. And we cried together and we talked, and I said, "You're like a man with no skin, you know, and everything that touches you now hurts." And I said, "What you really need right now is safety, like asylum."
Alice Cooper found asylum in the fall of '77 when Cheryl, Shep, and Bob Ezrin committed him to a long-term psychiatric care facility in White Plains, New York.
Once you're signed in New York, you're signed in for 72 hours for observation. That meant I was going to be 72 hours without alcohol. And I went, oh boy.
And the door closed. Boom. And we were outside, and he was inside.
I'm stuck here on the inside, looking out. I'm just another case. Drinking whiskey in the morning light. I never dreamed that I would wind up on the losing end. I'm stuck here on the inside, looking out.
In the fall of 1977, 29-year-old Alice Cooper found himself locked up in a psychiatric treatment center. There, he spent the longest nights of his life confronting his demons.
The first night in there, every noise felt like it was going to shatter me. My nerves were so bad. They didn't give me any pills or anything to calm me down. This was cold turkey. The next day, a little better. The next day was a little bit better. Started getting an appetite back, and pretty soon, after about 2 weeks, I was okay. I wasn't craving the alcohol, but the first 2 or 3 nights were just horrific.
After 3 months of therapy, a clean and sober Vincent Fournier, a.k.a. Alice Cooper, emerged with an understanding that the root of his problems lay in his evil Alice persona.
That was what a lot of it boiled down to. I'm just confessing this in front of the world. But I mean, a lot of it was the fact that I was drifting so much into the Alice character that it was getting so much bigger than me, I figured I had to bring that character off stage.
Controlling Alice wasn't his only concern. He was also worried about his wife, Cheryl.
Are you gonna see me now? Please don't see me hurt me, babe. 'Cause I know I let you down in oh so many ways.
He thought, she's going to see me or how I really am, and she's not going to like what she sees. And that was his fear. I saw through that, though.
We were fine. Yeah. Had to get reacquainted. Because, I mean, I was a different person.
Coming up, a sober Alice helps others to beat their demons.
Movie stars I've had call me, big movie stars, and say, how do you kick it?
When behind the music... In his typical tongue-in-cheek manner, Alice made light of his experience in the album From the Inside, released just a year after his release. But by 1981, Alice had gone off the deep end once again.
I've been designing the new Alice. The new Alice is much more, glad to say, much more vicious than the other one. More sleek, you know, much more, less sultry, but more hawk.
His sobriety had ended with a sip of Cheryl's wine.
I don't know why she didn't stop me. I don't know why she didn't just break a bottle over my head and send me right back to the hospital, but she didn't.
I didn't want to jump in right on it and say, what are you doing? And I probably should have. I was remiss on that. But it happened so quickly.
By that night, I had hidden 2 bottles of whiskey in the house.
And it snowballed and snowballed. And pretty soon he was pretty much drinking full-time like he was in the old days.
Musically, Alice tried hard to recapture the success of the old days. He released 3 albums from 1981 to 1983. Each one failed to regain the audience he had lost. After recording his 17th album, Dada, Alice returned home to Phoenix, where his alcohol-ravaged body simply gave out.
It's almost overnight, and then bam. He starts getting very sick, and he can't get out of bed. And you can tell he's in really rough shape, and there's a problem.
It wasn't good. He was very thin, very pale. I'd pretty much given up eating.
I didn't eat for like 10 days. And I was getting gastritis, and my stomach was filling up with blood and stuff like that.
In the fall of '83, Alice's family finally decided to check him into a local hospital.
I think it had to get to the point where the entire family was in agreement to help him.
He didn't want to see us. He was embarrassed. He'd let himself go so far.
I was a mess. I was a physical mess.
I think it took us almost all night to get him into the hospital. He just did not want to go.
Alice was critically malnourished. He hovered close to death.
Doctor took one look at him and said, "Ooh-wee, you're in trouble."
But before Alice's doctors could begin treating his alcoholism, they first had to stabilize his condition.
They put him in a sick bed. They hooked him up with tons of IVs and tubes. His system was completely depraved of any vitamins or nourishment. So they started shooting him full of vitamins.
And the doctor said he had cirrhosis of the liver, and he would be all right if he could straighten himself out.
Alice spent 2.5 weeks in the hospital drying out.
I was so tired of depending on it. I think I finally just got a point of just saying, I just don't want it anymore.
Willpower. And he had made up his mind then he was not going to drink.
I went out to the rehab center, talked for a little while about the old times, and then he got very meditative and said, you know, Coach, he says, I think my problem is I've forgotten who I am. Am I that person up on the stage, Alice Cooper, rather bizarre, or am I the son of a minister?
My dad, before he became a minister, was a drinker. He was a heavy drinker. When he became a pastor, he just stopped it all. One day, he just never drank, never smoked anymore. And I figure that's probably the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
After years of drinking, Alice Cooper finally kicked his addiction in September of 1983.
I didn't know that alcohol was that strong. I thought it was very social, and I thought I had total control of it. It gets you before you know you're had.
Alice replaced alcohol with another addictive habit.
Damn, you're hitting that thing a long way, Alice.
He always tells me he traded one bad habit for another one. Oh, I think this is a much better habit. I say, honey, just try to keep it down to 18 a day, okay?
Alice spent the next 3 years at home with his wife and children. He wasn't sure if he would ever play the role of Alice on stage again.
The thought of going back up on stage and doing Alice without being anesthetized was pretty frightening. But I somehow decided to try to write again.
He began by writing with guitarist Kane Roberts.
There's something unusual about it. And every once in a while we would start writing and just the songs with the lyrics would just start coming out of it.
Alice clicked with Kane, and in September of '86, they released Alice Cooper's 18th album. The follow-up tour forced Alice to confront his fear of performing his Evil Alice character while stone cold sober. Publicly, he put up a bold front.
Alice is back with a vengeance. Alice has been pent up for 4 years now, and I haven't really let him out for 4 years. That's sort of like not having sex for 4 years.
Privately, Alice was a bundle of nerves.
All day, I was just like pacing. I'm going to go up there, and I'm either going to be Alice Cooper or I'm going to be Barney Fife.
There are 20,000 people there. The lights are down. That fog's starting to rise, and that first chord's hitting.
Suddenly, this new, improved Alice came out, and he was almost unbearable.
I mean, he really became this guy, this really sick guy.
Just walking around like he owned the place, and it was like, come on.
And we were just in awe of it, and he just pulled us along.
It was great. I felt so good. I was like this surge of power, because I felt good. The first time I'd ever felt good on stage.
Welcome to my nightmare. Feel my Frankenstein. Meet my Romeo. He's a psycho.
Alice Cooper is now a cultural icon. The character brought to life by Vince Fournier back in 1971 continues to attract a new generation of fans, many of whom were born long after his gory glory days in the early 70s. In the last 10 years, Alice released 4 albums. In the spring of 1999, he celebrated his more than 3 decades of hit-making by issuing a box set of classic Cooper.
Hooray! Let the show begin. I've been ready.
I think Alice Cooper is one of the most underrated forces in the world of modern music. I mean, he brought a theatricality to rock that did not exist.
Though he's now in his 50s, the tireless rocker has no intention of resting on his laurels. He still tours annually, and he's hard at work on 2 new albums. Alice and the original members of the Alice Cooper Band buried the hatchet years ago. Neil, Michael, and Alice recently jammed together at the opening of Alice's sports and rock and roll themed restaurant in Phoenix called Cooperstown.
Bands will say, how do we stay in the business as long as you did, you know? I said, one thing is you have to be able to ride the roller coaster. You know, when you go down, you got to be able to stay on the track when you're down there and realize you're going to go back up again.
Only women bleed. Only women bleed.
After, what, 28 albums? He's definitely my favorite lyricist and songwriter. And the love of my life.
Alice's marriage to Cheryl has helped keep him focused through good times and bad.
When I find what I want, I stay with it, you know? And Cheryl's just been the best thing in the world for me.
He's a hopeless romantic, he'll admit that to you. And he loves me.
Yeah, I'm very thoughtful. I don't know if Alice is. He would send you flowers, but there would be a tarantula in the flowers. You know, I mean, that's his way of being, showing you he likes you.
The former social deviant and party animal is now sought out by artists seeking inspiration and wise counsel in their own battles with drug and alcohol addiction.
Movie stars I've had call me, big movie stars, and say, how do you kick it? You know, and I'd have to tell them, first of all, you have to want to. You can't just want to get dry. You have to really want to get rid of it.
Alice Cooper has mastered his addiction and taken control of his musical alter ego. His outrageous odyssey from Vincent Furnier to Alice Cooper took him beyond his wildest dreams to become one of rock and roll's most infamous nightmares. A nightmare that no longer haunts the man who became Alice Cooper.
The character of Alice doesn't belong. He doesn't do interviews. He doesn't do anything. He only lives when the curtain opens, and he dies when the curtain closes.